up, and we're going to give a little bit of time for people to come into the Zoom room, and then we'll get started in a few minutes. Just for everyone who's watching, we're live on Zoom, and we're also streaming on Facebook Live. So you can attend in either place, it's up to you, but yeah, either one works. So today we're really excited to welcome you to our webinar between a DSO, Kelly, and a former visa officer, Mandy. They will be having a conversation today that we hope will be really helpful for all of you. And just to tell you a little bit more about our Student Visa Week, which is happening this entire week, we have other webinars happening later on. Tomorrow will be a conversation between Mandy, who's here in this webinar, and the Argo co-founder, Chris Richardson. And he is also a former visa officer, and his experience is in Pakistan, Spain, Nigeria, and Nicaragua. That will be at 3 p.m. tomorrow, Tuesday, April 27th. And on Thursday, we have a really exciting conversation with 4 former visa officers. And between all of them, they have experiences in China, India, Mexico, Honduras, Colombia, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Iraq, and France. So there's a lot of experience in all these places, and I will send the links to those webinars in the chat right now. So here's the first webinar that will be tomorrow. And for the other webinar that will be on Thursday, it is also in the chat. Lastly, or 2 other things before we get closer to starting. So we are also raffling off a free Argo visa consultation for people who are attending our event. So how you can enter the raffle is by tagging your friends on Facebook in the event. This can be done before the event starts or live during the event. And at the end, at the end, whoever sorry, one second. I sent the link just to the panelists, so let me send the links to everyone. Thank you, Olga, for sending me a message. Here are the links to the other Zooms later this week. Back to the raffle. So for each person you tag, you will have 1 entry into the raffle to win the free Argo visa consultation. So if you tag 5 friends, you'll get 5 entries. At the end of the conversation, we will pick 1 person through a random number generator, and then we'll message you with more information on how to get your free consultation. So stay tuned for that. And the last piece of housekeeping is, if you're going to, we'll have a Q&A at the end. Please send your questions in the Q&A if you're on Zoom at the bottom, not the chat. This way we can be more sure that we're getting to your questions. So for the Q&A at the end, please send it at the Q&A tab on the bottom of Zoom. And if you're on Facebook, you can comment live on the video. So we're going to wait maybe a minute or so before getting started. We'll wait till 3:05 East. I'm sure you guys are all in a bunch of time zones, but in about a minute or so, we'll get started. And if you have any questions right now, you can go ahead and send it in the Q&A, or you can comment on our Facebook. And yeah, so thank you all for coming. We'll start in just a minute. Oh, and I'll send the Facebook link also in the Zoom chat if you wanted to go to Facebook. 1 second.
So great to see so many people joining us. I'm hoping that, that the information is helpful here, not just for international students, but also anybody who, ever applies for a visa to come to the United States. Sometimes people come over to study, but then eventually they end up, staying for like a work visa or under some other sort of status. So I think it's always useful to hear about officers make decisions, and it's so great to also talk to and see what international advisors see from students and how they deal with students.
Exactly. And thank you so much to Kelly, our guest panelist, for attending all the way from Miami, Florida. And I'm going to drop the link to the Facebook Live in the chat for everyone to go there if you wanted to participate in the tagging. And we'll get ready to get started. So thank you so much, Kelly, for being part of our conversation. And thank you, Mandy, for also being a part of our conversation. And we're really excited to hear your perspectives. So I'll just let Mandy and Kelly briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. Thanks, everyone.
Perfect. Kelly, do you kind of want to go first?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much to both of you for having me here today. I think this is really a wonderful opportunity for students to get to see, both from a consular officer, but also from the DSO's perspective, what is it that international students are going through and how we can help support. So my name is Kelly Poppin. Thank you all who are joining us today. I'm joining from Miami, Florida, as Davis mentioned. I am the Director of International Student Services at Miami-Dade College, and also the Pdso, which is the primary designated school official, the ones who signs the I-20 and gets all those immigration forms out to our students. So thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Kelly. I'm so excited to be here to talk to you today. I'll just give a little background on myself. My name is Mandy Fierbacher. I am a former consular officer, an ex-visa officer, if you will, that has worked at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing, China, at the U.S. Consulate in Matamoros, Mexico, and also at the U.S. Consulate in Hong Kong. In my time with the State Department, I have made decisions on 100,000 visa applications, and many of those were for international students like yourselves. So I love my career with the State Department, but now I am the Executive Vice President at Argo Visa. We are the first company in the world made up entirely of former visa officers who have worked for the Department of State, making these very important decisions on student visa applications around the world. And so we have made decisions on over 1 million visa applications, which is just crazy to me how many that is. And so I really am so excited to talk to Kelly today, because I think one of the big problems in this process for international students, it's a very stressful process, but there's also a very rare opportunity for visa officers to get a chance to speak to international advisors. And sometimes there's a lack of communication. And so what visa officers see behind the window, it would be so great if they could just call up Kelly on the phone and be like, what exactly is going on with the student? But of course, it doesn't really happen like that. Visa officers deal with a lot of volume. Pre-pandemic, we would regularly interview probably between 100 and 150 visa applicants a day. During the summers would be our really busy student visa months, because generally international students are applying for their student visas the 4 months before they start school in the fall. And so we would have a lot of students coming into the waiting room waiting to talk to a visa officer. And as somebody who used to do this every day, I loved my international student visa applicants, because they were the most fun to talk to hear about their futures and what they're excited about in the United States. And so hopefully we can kind of dive deep today on just sort of what goes on my side of the window, but also, what Kelly sees on a day-to-day basis. And I think this is a especially interesting year because of the pandemic, and there's a lot of things that are changing all the time, rules that are changing all the time. And even just by being here, we want to show international students that we're here for you. We want to help you get back to the United States, get back to your studies, and welcome you back. And so I'll probably start out by just asking Kelly some questions, because I'm sure we're also interested in, a day in the life of an international advisor, certain things that she kind of goes through when she's trying to help her international students. But Kelly, how did you get into your line of work as an international advisor and a Pdso for Miami-Dade College?
So before I answer that, I want to just reiterate something that you said, because I think it's really important for everyone to understand, is that there are so many parts and people and departments that are working with immigration visa processes, and particularly with F1 students. And so it's important, and I love that we're having these conversations, because we can see it from the perspective of more than one person in one area. Because a lot of times students will, come to me and say, well, my immigration attorney told me this, or the visa officer told me this, or USCIS told me this, and then they're telling, you know, their attorneys and visa officers that my DSO told me this, and we don't all connect, and we all have different information. And it's not necessarily that someone is giving you wrong information or that someone is not trying to help you, but that we all do things from our own side of the house and from our own regulations that we have to follow. And sometimes there's disconnect between those. So this is a really great opportunity, and I always encourage all of you to have these conversations with as many people in areas that you can, because it's not that we are all trying to help. Every single one of us is trying to do our job in the best way that we can, but sometimes our perspectives are different. So these conversations are a really great opportunity. But to answer your question of how I got into this, well, I've been working with international education for over 15 years. This is my passion, my career. I love everything about it. When I was in college, when I was in university as a student, I really had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I, took classes in areas that I was interested in, but I really had no idea what I wanted to be or what I wanted to do. And I studied abroad myself, my junior year in university, my third year, and I went to Spain and studied at a university in Spain. And it was such a life-changing experience for me. And along the way, I had all of these people that were helping me get there and helping me get through it and to process and to understand, the different intercultural experiences and the language and the bureaucracy and the red tape and the paperwork and all of those things that you go through to be an international student. And so seeing all of these people who helped me have this transformative experience, I realized that this is what I wanted to do. I want to be that person who helps students have this transformative experience. And so that is where I started my career. I've worked in international education in all different areas, in study abroad, in international recruitment, international student services. I've worked at universities, both in the United States as well as overseas. And so I've kind of seen the international student experience from all different angles, whether it's going or coming or recruiting or, helping all the way through that entire process. So it's something that I'm extremely passionate about. I've worked at private institutions. I worked at public institutions, large, small. So I definitely have seen the gamut, and I've seen, the many, many, many different scenarios and situations that happen with international students. And every day there are more. When you think you know everything, each day something else comes along. There's always really exciting and fantastic things that happen in the world of international students. So that's kind of where I began. But Mandy, you have such an incredibly rich career, and I always love hearing you talk and talking about the different places that you've been posted. Tell me about how you got into what you do.
Yeah, thanks so much for asking, Kelly. So it's really interesting. So I'm a lawyer by trade. I'm actually also a U.S. immigration attorney, but I joined the Foreign Service, so the United States Diplomatic Corps, after I practiced for about 3 years. And I really just wanted to see the world. And, I didn't want to be just in an office all day. And I was like, there's just so much out there. And I thought this career sounded fascinating and just something exactly like what I would want to do. So you have to take a foreign service exam, and there's all of these different steps in becoming a US diplomat. It's a very lengthy process, and it's very hard to get through. But I was so excited to go to Beijing, China for my first assignment. I myself am Chinese American, so it meant a lot that I got to represent the United States in the country where I was born. So that was really, really cool. And then, I was with the State Department for about 8 years and finally came back to California. I have twins. And so it was a good time for me to settle down. But I realized just how hard this process is for most people who don't have experience going to visa interviews, which who does? So, the first time you walk up to that window, you have to talk to a US government official, sometimes not even in your language, which is probably true if you're an international student. It can be really stressful. And most students don't realize, wow, this is a really fast process. It's only a few minutes. They don't know what to say. They've learned English as a second language. And so sometimes you're nervous about saying things correctly. And, when I was asked to join Argo, to help clients prepare for their visa interviews, it really was kind of a dream come true for me. And it was something that I've always wanted to do, especially because when I was a visa officer for the State Department, you just have such a limited amount of time to get to know each person that you talk to. You know, we have such high volume, we have to get through people as quickly as possible, which is actually a huge bummer because sometimes the most interesting people that you want to talk to, maybe, you know, for hours, you know that they're eligible for a visa, so you have to cut off the conversation after like a minute. And I'm like, man, I want to, you know, I want to really get to know them and what they're going to end up doing in the United States. And so that was a part of the job that I loved, was meeting new people and talking to new people. And now in this work that we do with Argo, I'm very passionate about it because I feel like we actually, all of that time we never had to talk to clients, to understand where they're coming from and what their worries are about the visa process. We now have the time to help them address that and help them get prepared, and understand the mindset of a consular officer and the pressure that we're under to make these very quick decisions that we clearly know as visa officers have a huge impact on the lives of people who are coming to us through that window. And so, you know, I almost feel like in a way my work with Argo is making up for all of those interviews that I did where I didn't really have the time to understand a visa applicant situation. And I had to just make a denial because I was worried that their motivations, you know, wasn't being clearly expressed to me as a visa officer. They couldn't explain exactly what they were going to do. They couldn't explain to me their plans, or I was worried about, you know, some other thing. You know, maybe their English wasn't very good. And I was worried, wow, like if this, you know, young student goes to the United States, lands in New York, and can't even get a cab to go to where they're supposed to go and gets kidnapped, like I kind of felt like that was on me, the officer. And so, you know, language is actually a very important thing for student visa applicants. We generally will do our interviews with international students in English, even if you're planning on studying English as a second language in the United States. And this is just something for ESL students to keep in mind. And why, if you say, hey, you know, can I, you know, speak my native language? You know, sometimes consular officers don't like that. It's because we want to make sure you can have a short conversation in English so we don't worry about something happening to you when you get to the United States, and that you can make your way around. So yeah, so that's how I became a consular officer, and then I became a U.S. immigration attorney, and now I'm helping get this company up and running and helping all of you be successful at your visa interview so you can ace it the first time and not have to worry about, I got refused the first time or the second time, and now I have to like go back and do the same thing over again. And what, you know, what's going to happen now? Will I ever get that visa? And that's something that we can help you with.
Because I think, at least from my perspective as the DSO, you know, the whole world of visas it's something we deal with every single day. You know, we're telling our students, you need to go get your visa, and here's the paperwork to get it. The interview process, we really kind of take a step back because we don't know, and every consulate, you know, from my perspective, is so different. I think there's just a lot of unknowns. So the place where students are usually getting their advising is from the university where they've been accepted and where they're getting their immigration paperwork. And usually we try not to say too much about the visa process because we know that we might say something and it could be totally different, or we might be wrong, or we don't really know. For the DSOs to have this information as well. But there's so much unknown as far as students and what they're getting into. And so I think Argo is such an amazing service because it's coming from the people who really know. You know, I can tell you as a DSO, bring all of these papers, bring your bank statements and all of these things. And then really they go up to your counter and maybe they talk to you for 1 minute and they don't show a single one of those pieces of paper. So Argo, I just think, is such an incredible service to students. So thank you for providing this.
Thanks so much, Kelly. And actually, it's really interesting that you bring up all the paperwork, because I have to say that one of the biggest points of contention at U.S. embassies and consulates around the world is consular officers used to get yelled at by managers if they're looking through papers. And there used to just be a slogan where consular officers tell each other, like, no papers, no documents. And, as an international student, you might wonder why. I've prepared so much for the consular officer to look at, for the visa officer to look at. Why is it that the officer won't look at my papers? And it's because we came to understand that papers can be forged, and there's always a black market outside of the US consulate that will sell you whatever you need, whether it's bank statements or housing documents or invitation letters. And so visa officers have really wised up and have been like, okay, I don't care about what you brought today. I just want to talk to you about what you're going to go do. And so for those of you that have this experience, just know this is why visa officers do this. And of course, you need to bring all of the important stuff. Kelly mentioned, your I-20. You also want to bring your passport that has at least 6 months validity left in it, because sometimes embassies and consulates, the consular officers don't like to issue visa stamps if your passport is about to expire. And so that's something also to keep in mind. And so Kelly, I'm really interested to hear, you're also of Study Florida, which is a coalition of colleges and universities based in Florida that are interested in having international students at their campuses. I'm sure because you're the chair, you probably hear a lot about what different schools are going through, and also in your own experience. What have you seen as a PDSO? What are some common questions that international students have for you about the visa process?
So yes, I'm the chair of Study Florida, which is a consortium of over 30 member institutions made up of secondary schools, colleges, community colleges, and four-year universities. So amongst us, we work together and really try to collaborate and pool our resources to be able to bring in more international students to the state. So yeah, we definitely serve as sounding boards for each other, trying to figure out, what are the trends and how can we help our students. There's definitely some common themes. One of the things that I see a lot, and particularly in my role as at Miami-Dade College, is the possible stigma behind community colleges when it comes to the visa interview. We have had some students who have gotten denied their visa, and it's believed that it's because they were applying to a community college as opposed to university. So I think that that's definitely a question in the minds of some students is, do I need to apply to that four-year university in order to be able to get my visa? Is that based on country? Sometimes we tend to see that of this is happening in a certain region of the world. Is that just chance, or is that because this particular country has more or less of a stigma on that? Could you speak to that a little?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I'm so glad you asked that. So I think that generally it's true that visa officers tend to be a little bit harder on community college students. Probably because we also tend to see such a wide range of profiles for community college students. Maybe you're somebody who has been out of school for a long time, but now all of a sudden you want to go back and get your degree, and you've decided to start out at a community college in the US. So the profile is more varied, but also we have found, it seems like the caliber of students going to four-year universities tend to be slightly higher in the sense that their English ability is a little bit better. And so sometimes it's not necessarily, the fact that you're going to a community college. It might be an issue with your English speaking ability. How well can you convey clearly to the consular officer exactly what you're going to go do? And if you have a lot of issues, speaking well, or you're nervous about that, that could be an issue that's taken into account. I think the visa interview process can be really tough for international students to figure out, just because some of it will always be a little bit subjective, bringing in the visa officer's experience. But I think what we help out at Argo with is we really understand the mindset of a visa officer and the pressures that visa officers face, but also how we make these decisions. Why is it that sometimes students get approved in 30 seconds and other students get denied in 30 seconds? And I've had clients come to me all the time that says, I didn't even get to say anything, I answered like 2 questions, and then I was handed a slip of paper and told that I was, refused a visa. And these are all things that we can kind of help you with, because I think as visa officers, we're always looking at those. We're trying to get through as many people a day as possible. And there's actually a running chart that is kept of every visa officer that's on the line and how many visas we've interviewed to that point. And so you always want to be somebody who's not at the bottom of the rung, incredibly slow, taking too much time with each applicant. And so we're always looking for those quick approvals and quick refusals. And for our clients at Argo, we want to make sure that you're in the first group and not the second. And so for community college students, I would say it's generally not about the fact that you're going to a community college. It's going to be about how prepared you are for that interview. You know, what is your English ability? Can you understand how to frame your situation in a way that is easily understandable by the consular officer, so that you can be a quick approval and not somebody that they have to, you know, really think about for a long time. And, you know, then you might even end up in something called administrative processing, which is when a visa officer doesn't want to make a decision at that moment. They're going to either think about it some more, or they may refer you to, you know, the fraud department because there's red flags in your story and they're concerned about whether or not you're telling the truth, or because you're, you know, missing your I-20 or you're missing signatures or some sort of documentary deficiency. So you want to make sure that you're as prepared as possible for this visa interview that's probably going to be less than 5 minutes, but it could really dictate, you know, where you're going to be spending the next 4 years of your life.
So it's probably less about the fact they're going to community college and more about the way they've presented themselves at the interview.
Yes, that's exactly right. Because I think one of the big scene, and this is true of international students as well, is when they come to their Argo consultation, they just have so much they want to tell you. They want to tell the visa officer, like, here's my whole life story. You know, it's just like everything comes out. But for visa officers, because they have such a limited amount of time, you really have to pick and choose the important things to say and what will highlight sort of your background and why you should be eligible to go to the US to study for the degree that you're studying. And so what we do at Argo is we really help you try to focus in on the important points that you have to make, and not just come and go, bleh, like, you know, everything just comes out and the answer is like, okay, hold up. I don't even know what to do with all that information that you gave me. And I'm really stressed. So I'm just going to have to refuse your visa because I can't understand you, that sort of thing.
Wow.
I know. It's
one of the things that that we see a lot as DSOs, and you had mentioned paperwork before and not wanting to have a lot of paperwork, is that we get a lot of students asking us to write letters for them. Maybe they were denied their visa or something happened, and so they want a letter from the DSO or from the college, basically stating that, you know, we want this student to come and we recommend that you give them a visa, etc. And I usually say that that letter is not going to serve much of a purpose. Is that true?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I don't think that those letters are very helpful, because I think in the mind of the visa officer, you know, of course, the international advisor is going to want the student to come, but it's possible that you have never met the student before. And so I think for visa officers, we're always thinking like, I'm the first person to actually lay eyes on this person and hear them talk about their experience and what they're going to go do in the United States. And if to us that doesn't make any sense, it's unlikely that the international advisor will understand more than we have. And it's just, and that may not even be true, but that's just sort of our understanding of the situation. So I think you're right. And I don't think that, you know, writing letters from a DSO's perspective is very helpful.
Right.
Yeah.
That's good information to have, because we do get a lot of that. And again, it's not because we don't want to help the students. We're actually trying to prepare them correctly. And that's why I say it's so important, because there's all these different perspectives, and it may look like, oh, the DSO is not being helpful because they're not writing this letter, when in fact that letter is not going to be helpful. So that's really good information to have.
Yeah. And actually something that just popped to the front of my mind as you're talking about this, Kelly, is one thing that visa officers always have issues with is when we're interviewing a student who is in a rush to get their visa, they're trying to get to, you know, their school on time, we'll notice that, oh, classes actually starts for this student in 2 days' time. It's going to take about days to get that visa printed, and then they have to pick it up, and then they have to get their flights and, you know, go over there. So under the law, visa officers are actually not allowed to approve visas when an international students are not going to make their start date on time. And so this is something that actually, I feel like a lot of DSOs don't know this, and students don't know this as well, but it's actually written into our foreign affairs manual that we can't do this. And so therefore, what we have to do with these cases is we have to take it back to our desk. Well, first we have to ask the student to go contact their international advisor or their DSO to update their start date in SEVIS. And then we will look at it a few days later, make sure that it's been updated before allowed to approve the case. So I'm just curious, in your experience, is it complicated when a student has a request like that to update their start date? How flexible, at least from your school or your experience with the Study Florida group, is it for different universities to change the start date?
So I'm so glad you brought this up, and it's so timely because actually our summer term is starting on May 10th, and I have several students right now with the visas being backlogged and US embassies just starting to open up who have their appointments for right around that date, maybe May 7th or May 8th or even a couple days after classes. And I've been telling them to defer their start until the fall, but they really, really want to get here for summer. So that's really great information to have because it may actually hurt them in the visa interview to be that close to date. So I think every school is a little bit different. It will depend, some of the, probably larger universities that may have competitive admissions, they might have cohorts that start a certain date and it might be harder to push back. But I think generally speaking, and definitely from my perspective at Miami-Dade College, deferring is not a difficult thing to do. We at my school, we can defer at any time. Right now, because of summer term coming up and a lot of our students haven't gotten those visas, we're in the process this week of contacting everyone and saying, okay, if you haven't gotten your visa yet, can we defer you? And we just literally go into CVIS and we change the program start date. And and especially right now that all of the I-20s are being electronic and we can send them by email. It will stay the case in the future once the pandemic is over. I hope it will. But we can just send them an email. We put in their new start date, send them an email, and it's super easy. But it's different at other schools. If there are universities with competitive admissions and specific cohort dates, it might be a little bit harder. But I think that most schools want to know that their students are coming before 2 days before classes start. That close anyways, the university may have already made the decision that they need to defer, and it's not going to be enough time for orientation and get their housing and do all of the things that they need to get here. So from our perspective, we don't want students coming to late. We don't want them to miss their classes. We don't want them getting into classes that they need. So deferring is preferable in the case of my school, at least.
That's really interesting, Kelly. So it would actually be easier for Miami-Dade College. It would be easier to defer a semester versus how likely is it to be like, oh, we'll just change your start date by like a week, for example? Is that harder to do because you would be missing classes?
Yeah, so that for us is an impossibility. We have, our certification that we've gotten from CVIS is for specific start dates. And, at my school, at least, our start dates are, May 10th for summer and August 23rd for fall and January 7th for spring. And those are the dates that you have to arrive. So if you don't make it by May 10th, then we need to defer you to August 23rd. Us, if you miss class, and again, some schools may be more flexible than others depending on how they're set up. But for us, if you miss a week of class, then you're going to drop from those classes and you're going to be below your 12 credit enrollment minimum, which is then going to lead to a termination of your record. I mean, it sets a whole set of things in motion that are hard to recuperate from. So we do not want anyone arriving late. And even, I've had conversations with Customs and Border Patrol at the airport, and they don't have to let students in the airport after the program start date. Sometimes they will, but it's, it could be a cause for them to get turned back also if they come after that program start date on their I-20.
Yeah, gosh. I can only imagine how much harder it is going to be this year because of, embassy and consulate closures. And so, what is it going to look like for Miami-Dade, this coming summer and the fall? Is it very different than, well, I won't even mention last year because last year was just crazy, but what about compared to like 2 years ago?
So it's different. I mean, this has been a difficult year for everyone, everywhere, all across the board. I'm sure with Argo, it's been difficult. At the university, with the students, it's been difficult. Families, there's just so much going on in everybody's personal and professional lives, I think. So it's definitely looking different. I am optimistic, though. I think that we're going to bounce back. This summer, we definitely have a lower number of students coming. And for many reasons, one, they're not ready to come. They're not ready to travel because of the fact that COVID-19 is still rampant, so they're making the conscious choice not to come yet. I think even more than that is the fact that, they haven't been able to get their visas, or they may have travel restrictions in their countries where they just absolutely can't fly here. It's not allowed to fly here. So all of those things combined, plus, the economy is bad. People have less money for tuition. Families may be, ill. So there's a lot going on that is definitely lowering our numbers at the moment. I'm confident that fall will look better. I think that there are students who are finally getting visa appointments right now who wanted to start last fall, and they've been deferring, semester last summer. They deferred maybe from, May 2020, then to fall 2020, then to spring 2021, then to summer, and now we're going to defer them to fall again. So those students are anxious to get here, and some of them even already have their visas. They may be coming from Brazil, for example, that has travel restrictions, and so they're waiting for them to say, okay, you can fly, and as soon as they can fly, they're going to be here. We will have, a larger group in the fall from the accumulation of students that have been trying to come here for the past year. And so I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic that this will pick up again. And, definitely with the help of Argo and when the embassies and everything is starting to open up and there's not as much backlog and everyone can get their visas, that this will pick up again. So,
yeah.
And even the services that we provide are different. Like I said, we now have electronic I-20s. A lot of classes are either blended or online, have less of that face-to-face component. Things all across the world are changing. We're using technology more. I mean, look at us right now. We're all on Zoom and Facebook, and we're not even thinking twice about it. And what, you're in California, I'm in Miami, Davis is in New York. We've hit like all the three big areas of the United States. So there's a lot that we can do, and there's a lot, I think that we can do great things, and that the international student experience is going to come back and be just as great as it ever was, if not better.
I agree with you. And I really look forward to that day, because I think we're all getting a little tired of the pandemic, looking forward to getting a lot. You said something that was really interesting to me just now. So with Miami-Dade College, how many students do you have, and just, an estimate on who have maybe started classes abroad and are actually coming to campus for the first time? Do you have a lot of those?
We don't have a lot. There are a few, but generally speaking, we try to have our students on campus to start the classes. The process can be a little bit complicated when they've already, started their I-20 process and then getting into classes online. Some universities won't allow it. Some others do. They promote it. But it just is all across the board as far as who's online and who is not. There's been a lot of, and I'm sure you know this, but the regulations that have come down from SCVP in the last year have been kind of on a roller coaster, where we get one set of guidelines and then it changes and then something else is dropped on us. And so it's been a lot of kind of trying to figure out what we can do and what we should do and how we should do it. They have said that new international students with the F1 visa are not allowed to take all of their classes online. In order for them to be in that F1 status, they shouldn't be taking all their classes online. They need to have at least some face-to-face component. Right. There are workarounds around that, where they might be completely in their home country and not be on F1 status yet, classes online, but not all of the classes are offered 100% online through, like a virtual college type of department at all universities. Some places there are, some places there aren't. So, at Miami-Dade College, we do have a virtual college MDC online department. So students can take classes through that if they need, if they really want to get started. And that's another good question for you, because, there is another rumor or stigma or, perception that if a student starts taking their classes online, they might be denied the visa because the consular officer might think, well, if you can take these classes online, why are you going to go to the United States? Or if you've already started this, then, what has changed to make you need this visa to go to the US? Is that true? Is that something that they might have difficulties getting their visa if they start their classes online?
I definitely don't think so. I'm actually in regular touch with a lot of my, colleagues who are still in the State Department, and that's definitely not true, because I think every visa officer knows that actually being on campus and being in person is such a different educational experience than having to do everything virtual. I think that a visa officer might want to know, if you started out studying virtually, how has that been going? How is that going to transition you into being, ready to study in person, and what the differences are? And I think a student visa applicant might need to be prepared for addressing that and what the differences are and explaining themselves. But generally, it's not going to be like, oh, if you started out virtually, we think you should just stay in your home country and study. That's really not the case. But you should be prepared for the interview. And if that's something that you have questions about, it could be, I've heard that it could be a more difficult interview, and you'll definitely want to be prepared for it. So you can sign up for a consultation with an ex-visa officer at argovisa.com, and we can work with you through that. One other thing I wanted to mention, Kelly, because you were talking about some of your students getting appointments late and maybe right around the time when they have to show up for class. And this is just for international students, try to get the first available visa appointment you can, even if it is after the start date, because that is the only way that you can actually request an emergency expedite appointment. You have to already have a visa appointment before you request that emergency expedite. And based on the State Department's announcement, I think this was maybe a month and a half ago, all students should qualify for what's called an NIE, or a national interest exemption, in getting that emergency appointment if it is available, if there's no routine visa appointment processing. So just keep that. You can't go straight into getting an emergency visa appointment. You have to have another visa appointment first before they're willing to move up your date. And so for your students that might be getting right around that time, maybe if they request the expedite, they might be able to make it for the summer semester, but let's see. It just really depends on a country by country basis.
That's great to know. That's great to know. I think there's a lot of questions right now about even just getting that appointment. What do they have to ask for? How do they get the NIE? That's good advice. I've been telling students, even if they do decide to defer to fall, to keep that same appointment. We'll get them their new I-20, but they need to keep that appointment and not try to put it off, because they may, get put back into line again.
No, absolutely. And, Study Florida has been such a great partner with Argo in, just really doing everything they can to support international students, to make sure they have no hiccups at that visa interview, and just throughout the entire coming over to the United States. What have been, I would love to hear, you, Kelly, have been so instrumental in recommending your students use Argo. Have you heard back from any of those students? Like, how were their experiences using Argo?
Yes, no, I've had several students use your services, and the feedback has been phenomenal. We've been partners now for over a year, and I can promise you that if the feedback wasn't good, we would not be having this conversation with you. But I am just such a fan of the Argo services because of the feedback that I've gotten from my students. And, like you said, this is, my role as DSO, and just me and my career and what I do, my role is to support international students in whatever way possible. help their experience be better and easier, and whatever we can do to facilitate that. So for me, Argo is, it's a service. It's not something that is coming out of my college or that is, put on their tuition. It's something completely outside of us. I don't gain anything, from promoting Argo services by any means, other than I'm more likely to get my students, right? If they get their visa. If they don't get their visa, they're not coming to Miami-Dade College or anywhere else, I think the visa part of the whole process is sometimes underplayed because it's not the part that we're touching, right? That I'm not working with the visa. There's nothing I can do to control it or to help it. And so I just kind of, I should say in the past, before I had this partnership with Argo, is I just kind of left that to the side. Okay, go get your visa and then we'll worry about everything else. But if you don't get your visa, then nothing else is going to happen. So it's almost the most important part of it is the most important part of the whole process, because that's what gets everything rolling. So yes, the students have used Argo, have spoken wonders about it. They were really impressed. I think some of them were a little bit nervous at first, like, it sounds like a lot of money and, we're paying all this money for my flights, for my tuition, for all of these different things. But in the long run, if you don't get that visa, if you don't get over that first hurdle, then none of the rest of it is going to happen. And so I think it's money really well spent. That's what my students have said, is that they're so glad that they, made the decision to spend that money. It really just helps. I think it's helped them, first of all, to know, to understand. And these webinars are great as far as getting a little bit of that word out there. And the more that the DSOs know and understand this, the more that we can help them. But having that like mock experience and being told, okay, don't say this, do say this, or, oh, you should have said that, all of those things, it's like a trial run for biggest date, that in the start off your academic career. So I have had students that, have said that they are incredibly glad that they used those services. They got the visas, they're here. I had those conversations with them because they are here in Miami having those conversations with me. And the ones who don't get the visa and the ones who, haven't used those services, I don't get to have a lot of conversations with them about what exactly happened in that interview, because I never meet them. I never get to know those students. And so we hear little bits and pieces about why someone didn't get a visa, but, not all of them share that information with me. They may get denied, and never even tell me about it. They'll just, give up or, decide this isn't for me, and that's a tragedy. They may have missed out on this incredible opportunity because one person in 30 seconds made the decision that they aren't ready. So, I think that it's really important for students to take the visa interview seriously and the preparation for that seriously, because without that, none of the rest of this is going to happen.
That's such a good point, Kelly. And thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm actually just really curious with, some of your students who have been denied visas. I feel like I've never had the chance to talk to a DSO or an international advisor about what happens after that. Is it sort of just like a drop off and you never hear from the student again? Or do they kind of come back and they say, I was denied my visa? Like, what does that look like? And I'm totally uncomfortable and it's sad, but what do you do when that happens?
So there's a little bit of both. Like I said, some of them, it's a drop off and I may never hear from them again. That happens. And sometimes I don't even know that they've gotten denied. They just kind of drop off and they're gone. And know if it's because they got denied a visa or they had other things happening in life. Other ones, are persistent and this was their dream and they're going to achieve this dream no matter what. And so, they'll contact me. This is where a lot of times what I mentioned before is that they'll ask for a letter from me, stating that whatever it may be, maybe they got denied. And so sometimes they say, that they know why they got denied. They were told this is the reason why they got denied. Other ones have no idea why they got denied. They may say, well, I didn't get the visa. I really don't know why. And so I'll try to talk through them. Okay, what did you say? What did they ask you? And then I try, from the best of my ability to deduce, okay, it sounds like maybe they think you need English as a second language instead of, business, which is on here. So let's try, let's put you into the English as a second language program. We'll change your I-20 to say that that's what you're taking and try that. Always necessarily no. And it just, And every student is different based on their, their own personal experiences and history and context as to whether they're going to keep trying or not. So, it's hard from the DSO perspective because we really want to be there for those students and we want to help them. There's also not a lot that we can do, and we don't always get all of the information. So, it's sad for sure. It's definitely one of the parts of my job that I don't like. We talked about that before, like what do we love about our jobs? And I love so much about my job, but there are pieces that I hate. And that's the scene when students don't get their visas or they get their immigration status terminated for X number of reasons. Those are the really hard parts about this job. We try to do everything that we can to avoid that and to make sure our students are successful.
Sounds like it's such a hard job to have. Sorry, yes.
Oh, I'm going to hop in because we only have 10 more minutes. So I want to start getting some questions if that's okay.
Of course.
Okay, great.
I talk forever.
It's easy to lose track of time. So the first question I think may be more for Kelly, but someone's just asking if you could talk a little bit more about the I-20 and like what is the process of submitting it and what steps need to be taken by the student in this process.
Okay. So the I-20 it's a pretty straightforward standard process. But what the I-20 is basically the immigration document that is produced after the DSO submits all the information that we gather into the SEVIS database. So that's the database that is basically connects the US government with the university or institution. So what we do is through the application process, the admissions process, we gather all sorts of documents from the student. And they're pretty standard across the board. There'll be slight variations from university to university, but it's basically, your passport, your demographic information, your birth date, your name, your parents' name, all of those kinds of things. And financial support, who is your sponsor? How much money do you have? What program are you studying for? And you've been accepted, all of those things. And then we take that and we put it into the system. And so we have to have all of those things and you have to be admitted to the school before we can put it into the system because we can't give you an I-20 if you can't study at our school, and it's not guaranteed that you're going to study at our school. So you have to have been accepted to that school, and then we're able to put all of that information into the database and print out a form. And that's the form that we send you. So the actual I-20 is very simple. It's literally just typing in, answering the questions in the database and printing it out. But we need to make sure that you are qualified to go to our school before we can put that information in.
Great. Thanks so much, Kelly, for the clarification. So another question is, this one's for Mandy. Is it true that once a student did a change of status in the US from B1, B2 to F1 visa, the student will never be able to apply for another visa from outside of the US?
That is definitely not true. So you can definitely do a change of status from within the US. I actually think, though, be a little bit careful about that, because if you're going to the United States on a tourist visa or going for business and then making that change with, domestically into a different visa category, like studying, the government official is probably going to want to understand how that change came about, whether that's in your change of status or at your next interview, even if that happens years later. We'll be able to sort of see that and we'll ask you about it. So definitely be prepared to explain that, because that seems like a pretty big change to go for tourism somewhere and then all of a sudden be like, oh, I'm just going to stay here for a few years.
And I'll add to that if I can, because we do get a lot of change of status students. Basically, if you can get your visa outside of the US, it is much, much preferred. The change of status process exists, but it is something that they don't necessarily like to do. So it's really meant for people who are in the United States. They've changed their mind about why they wanted to come. They came as a tourist because they wanted to be a tourist, and now they have discovered this school and want to do something else. And they really can't get that visa otherwise. Maybe it's from a country where, there's political turmoil or, there's difficulties in getting that visa. But if you are able to travel, then it's much, much preferred.
Great. So I think this is also going to be more directed towards Kelly. Should students come to the USA 5 to 7 days earlier in order to make a coronavirus test?
So I would say yes. I think every school is going to have their own regulations about whether or not you have to self-quarantine before starting your classes. But even prior to coronavirus, I always recommend coming in advance of your classes starting, because you're going to need to find a place to live. You're going to want to, visit the campus and figure out where all the buildings are. You might need to take care of, some paperwork, maybe get a driver's license. There's all sorts of things that you need to take care of as an international student. And you have 30 days. There's a 30-day admission period before your classes start that you can come into the country. So I recommend that you take advantage of those 30 days and come in earlier. But as far as the corona test, depends on the school, but I would definitely recommend it. I would definitely recommend getting a test and, even having that 14-day, self-quarantine period to make sure that everybody is safe.
Great, thanks so much. And it's extra relevant now, and I'm sure this is, a new experience for everyone. So it's helpful to have your advice on that. Mandy, as a visa officer, what red flags do you look out for during an interview?
That is a great question. And it's really hard to generalize because, visa applicants are from all over the place. It could be very different depending on which country you're applying in. But I would say, a big red flag for us actually is not being able to speak any English at all. I mentioned that earlier, because a lot of students come to us and they're like, well, we think that the best place to study English is in the United States, and that's where we want to do it. But for visa officers, they like to see that you've already taken some steps to getting there, whether it's taking some English classes or maybe taking your TOEFL exam or things like that. They don't like it when, the first thing that you say at the visa interview is, oh, can I speak Chinese, or can I speak Spanish, or can I speak, whatever like native language I speak. So that tends to be a red flag. Something else is, and I know this is kind of hard to gauge, but when a student is really just extra nervous about that visa interview, so I think a normal amount of nervousness all the time, but if a person is like so terrified or so nervous, then it might make your visa officer think, perhaps you have other motivations that you're not sharing with us. And so because we get so good at reading people, the State Department calls us human lie detectors. If something doesn't seem right, if we have like this like gut instinct that something doesn't feel right, then we might just be more prone to refuse the visa versus taking a lot of extra time to ask additional questions, because we have found that the more questions we ask, the more questions it generates. So sometimes we would rather do a quick refusal. And that, I think, is the unfortunate part about our bureaucracy and our system, is that we just don't have the time to get to know everybody's situation, which is why you should make it as easy as possible for the consular officer to approve your case and not make it more difficult and give them and then they have to think through all of the things you said. You have to tell your story in a way that's understandable to them.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Mandy. And because we're running close on time, we're not going to be able to get to all the questions, but all the questions that are on our Facebook, we'll try to answer all of those, just typing them in the comments. So you can move your questions to there if you'd like. But one more question. There's a few questions, Mandy, about 214B, people who've had previous refusal under 214B. Could you explain what that is briefly?
Yes. So 214B is our section of law that says that you are basically an intending immigrant in the eyes of the visa officer unless you're able to overcome that presumption, which means that to me, you're going to the United States to stay unless I decide otherwise. But really what that means is it covers everything. Anything that doesn't make sense about your case, anything that gives the visa officer pause to not want to approve your visa, we would deny under 214B. I would say that if you've had a 214B denial, it is definitely possible for you to get that visa approved, but keep in mind that every single time you apply, there are notes on your interview in our system. So the more times you've been refused, it becomes more difficult for you to get your visa approved. And so that is definitely when I would recommend that you work with somebody who's an expert who can understand your situation and see if we can get it turned around. And that's what we do at Argo. So hopefully we can help you.
Great. Thanks so much, Mandy. So just to wrap everything up, you can go to our Facebook, and this whole webinar will be there, so you can come back to it in the future. Our Facebook is Argo Visa for USA. You can search just in your Facebook. And also we have 2 more webinars this week. I'm sending them in the chat right now. And also I just wanted to thank Kelly so much for joining us and sharing her knowledge as a DSO and an international advisor, and also thank Mandy for also sharing her knowledge. And we really want to thank you all for attending the webinar and joining us today. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions. And if you would like to book a consultation on Argo, it's at www.argovisa.com. I also just sent that in the chat for anyone who wants to go straight to our website. Mandy or Kelly, do you have anything else you'd like to say?
I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much. First of all, to everyone who joined us today and who listened to us. Great questions, and I hope this was helpful to everyone. But thank you so much to Mandy and Davis for setting this up and for inviting me to join you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Kelly. Thanks for everyone coming to see us. And I also just hope, if you're an international student who's coming back to campus, this summer or this fall, we welcome you here. We hope that you'll have no problems with your visa interview and getting into the country, and just best of luck to everyone on this sort of stressful journey and the stressful process.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much. And thanks to everyone for attending. We hope to see you on later throughout the week.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.